Hello, I believe we are live now. It is a pleasure to be here with everyone once again. I believe we are still, of course, as you may have noticed, waiting for one of our guests to join us, dear public. She will be joining us shortly as she figures out some technical issues. But without further ado, we will be starting here with one of our esteemed guests, Katja Bocher, and who is the sorry, let me just. We are here with Katja Bocher, who is one of the political affairs officers and also it's not vice director. Deputy director. Thank you so much. Deputy director for the UN Center for Regional Disarmament in Latin America and the Caribbean. Before everything else, I would like to briefly introduce myself for those who don't know me. My name is Felipe Gobato Scheibler. I am a non-binary person and I answer to any pronouns. There are no mistakes to be made here. I have the pleasure of being a legal advisor for the URGS IHL clinic and also the policy and research coordinator for U40PNW. So, of course, disarmament is an issue that is very dear to me. I have the pleasure here of being with Dr. Katja Bocher, who is not only who, as I said before, is the deputy director and a political affairs officer for the Regional Center for Peace, Disarmament, and Development in Latin America and the Caribbean, or UNLIREC. She has previously worked as a researcher for the European Leadership Network and has a master's on non-proliferation and international security through King's College London and also on political science, journalism, and psychology from Universität Leipzig. Without further ado, Dr. Katja, please, if you could share your presentation with us. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much, Felipe. Good morning, everybody. I am Katja Bocher. I will share my screen and then we are off to have a presentation today. Okay. Felipe, if you just let me know once you can see it. Now. Okay, perfect.
It's here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. So today we are going to speak about the issue of regional disarmament and youth involvement. Thank you very much for having us today at the 4th Brazilian Conference on International Humanitarian Law. It's a pleasure for us to be here. And I think it is a fantastic opportunity to work across the different areas of expertise and figure out how disarmament is relevant to the work of international humanitarian law. Today here with me, or hopefully shortly with me, will be my colleague Elena Battini. She's our UN volunteer and junior project advisor for youth and disarmament. And as Felipe already said, we together work at and here she comes as I'm announcing. Elena, hello, good morning. I was just making the announcement that you'll join shortly. And Elena and I, we work for the United Nations Regional Center for Peace, Disarmament and Development in Latin America and the Caribbean, also known as UNLIREC. And yes, the abbreviation does not correspond to the actual title of the center. Let me just start with telling you a little bit about what UNLIREC is and what UNLIREC actually does. We are one of 3 regional centers. We are part of the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs. They're also known as UNODA or UNODA. There's 3 centers, as I just mentioned, one covering Africa, based in Togo, one covering Asia and the Pacific, based in Nepal. And then there's UNLIREC. We are based in Lima, Peru, and we cover all of Latin America and the Caribbean states, which are 33 states in total. And we support states in our region to achieve and maintain peace and security through disarmament, arms control, and non-proliferation. And we also have a very small office in Trinidad and Tobago, where we have a lot of Caribbean colleagues who work specifically on the Caribbean. What we are going to cover today is, first of all, we start with what is disarmament and what is actually regional disarmament, if we are more specific, and how is this relevant to promoting international humanitarian law. And then Elena will cover some of UNLIREC's work, the role and the importance of youth being involved in disarmament, and what opportunities there are for youth to shape the future of disarmament. And that, I believe, after the presentation, we will have a Q&A session, so then you can answer all your questions. So let's start with the first, which is, what is disarmament? Instead of just giving you the definition, I invite you to just play on Mentimeter with me. You can scan the code or go to the website directly and answer the question, what word comes to mind when you think of disarmament? So I'll just give you a moment, but please just scan the QR code. And I think you have three options. You can enter one word, or you can enter three different words. And I'll just stop the presentation for a second and share the screen of the Mentimeter.
That is indeed a very good icebreaker. I would like to briefly interject while our guests are answering that while the Q&A will be open at the end, you may submit your questions at any time in the YouTube live chat. We will be registering them and collecting them for the end of the session. Thank you.
Great. I'll see that is my screen sharing, Felipe? I don't think so, right?
It hasn't actually stopped sharing.
Okay, let me just try that again. Sometimes there might be a quick delay. Share. Yeah, there we go. So thanks for participating. Please keep it coming. What word comes to mind when you think of disarmament? Here again, the QR code for those who didn't get it when I did the presentation. So important, I think, peace and security. I think that's a good start on, and we will get back to that in a second. Also peacekeeping, yes, very good. Stability, equity, very interesting contribution on that. Prosperity, future, trust, also very good. Yes, disarmament requires trust, confidence, and I really also like the contribution of development and justice. So I'll just give it another minute to see if there's a few more, and then I think that gives us a very good jumping off point on what we mean by disarmament. Great, thank you so much. And can I invite the organizers to share a quick video?
History.
And then this is what the United Nations thinks of the issue of disarmament.
Throughout history, countries have pursued disarmament to stop arms races, build trust, and protect people from harm. Disarmament has been central to the work of the United Nations since its founding, and it is critical for building a more secure and peaceful world. But what actually is disarmament? For the United Nations, this means 1. The elimination of weapons of mass destruction. 2. The regulation of conventional weapons and balanced reduction of armed forces. And 3, making sure that new technologies are used in line with international norms. So why does disarmament matter? Access to weapons doesn't necessarily cause conflict, but it can encourage, intensify, and prolong it. Disarmament and arms control play a critical role in preventing and ending crises and armed conflict. Disarmament can also reduce an immense financial burden on societies. In 2019 alone, world military spending was $1,917 billion, the highest since the Cold War. That's about $250 for every single person in the world, and over 12 times what the wealthy world spends on aid. The cost of a single stealth fighter is enough to put 200,000 children through a year of school. The cost of one battle tank is enough to treat 26,000 people for malaria. And this isn't counting the cost of what is destroyed and the lives lost and ruined because of conflicts. The world is overarmed and peace is underfunded. Sustainable development can only happen in a safe and secure environment. And we need disarmament to help provide that.
Great, thank you so much for sharing that. We'll continue with the presentation now that you know or you're more familiar with what disarmament is. And I think based on the Mentimeter, which you submitted, I could also see that you are indeed already familiar with some of the key aspects related to disarmament. The next, I wanted to share a little bit the relevance of the global disarmament treaties and the different frameworks they are, because, and I won't go into details, I'll just give you sort of a list, and then, you can do your own research after, or we can discuss them a little bit more during the Q&A session. But I wanted to sort of highlight a couple of areas where there is global treaties and frameworks. The first area are nuclear weapons. There is a treaty on the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. That's the NPT, which was adopted in 1968. That treaty aims to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons, promote peaceful nuclear energy, and work towards disarmament. It's near universal, and I think it's probably the most well-known treaty when we think of the issue of disarmament. But there's also others. There's the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, the CTBT, which has yet to enter into force, but has already been adopted. But it has a requirement of a certain number of countries and of certain countries to ratify it before it enters into force. So the entry into force is still outstanding. And that treaty prohibits all nuclear explosions for testing purposes. But as I said, it has yet to enter into force. And then there's also a newer treaty, which is the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the TPNW. That's been adopted in 2017. And that has been a real milestone because for the first time, states agreed on the complete elimination of nuclear arsenals and making it therefore the first legally binding global ban on nuclear weapons. Not all states in the world are part of that treaty, but they can, once they're ready to join, join. And then there's a second area which focuses on chemical and biological weapons. The Biological Weapons Convention was adopted in 1972, and it was the first multilateral disarmament treaty banning an entire category of weapons, prohibiting the development and the possession of biological weapons. Again, as this is a treaty, states join when they are ready to fulfill those commitments. And then there's the Chemical Weapons Convention, which is from 1993, and that outlaws the production, stockpiling, and use of chemical weapons, and is enforced by the Organization of the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, the OPCW, and Brazil is also a state party. And then we have a third area, which is on conventional arms and arms control. And here I've included, again, the legally binding ones. There is the Arms Trade Treaty, which I think is quite well known, which looks at regulating the international trade in conventional weapons, including small arms, but also ammunition, with an emphasis on making the legal transfers safer, so there's no diversion of any legal arms into illegal spheres. The Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, which is from 1980, which restricts or prohibits certain types of weapons which are deemed excessively injurious or indiscriminate, such as certain types of landmines. And then there's also the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention, also known as the Ottawa Treaty, which is a treaty which bans the use, stockpiling, production, and transfer of anti-personnel landmines and mandates their destruction. So this is kind of a little bit the framework on disarmament. And now we can look at regional disarmament and what we actually mean by that. Regional, so disarmament, there is global commitments, but of course disarmament is critical at not only the global level, but also the regional level and the country levels where the implementation takes place. It is generally crucial, and I think that came out in the Mentimeter as well, to maintaining global peace and security. And when we talk about regional disarmament, it refers to collaborative efforts within a specific geographic region or area, for example, Latin America or Latin America and the Caribbean. And it focuses on localized security concerns because concerns about security differ across the world, and building trust among neighboring states and reducing the risks of regional conflicts. And it also, I always think of it as a sort of top-down and bottom-up model. So it helps to translate the global commitments we just looked before and the obligations states have assumed into concrete actions. So it goes from the top down to the regional and the national level, but it works the other way as well. A lot of advances on the global disarmament agenda have come through regional leadership, and I'll give you two very good examples from our region in particular. The first is the Treaty of Tlatelolco, which I always find tricky to pronounce, but it is basically the establishment of the first nuclear weapon-free zone in Latin America and the Caribbean. This was already in 1967, so we are talking long time ago. And it was the first nuclear weapon-free zone established in a populated area where people live. And Alfonso Garcia Robles, who was leading that process, actually won the Nobel Prize for that. And it inspired the creation of similar zones in other parts of the world. And at the same time, it supported the global non-proliferation efforts. And I think this is a very important milestone of leadership in Latin America on the nuclear weapon agenda. And then the second, which sometimes is a little bit closer to people's sort of day-to-day life, which is related to illicit arms trafficking, is the Inter-American Convention Against the Illicit Manufacturing of and Trafficking in Firearms, Ammunition, Explosives, and Other Related Materials, which is a long title, and it has become known as the CIFTA, which was established in 1997. There was no global framework on illicit arms trafficking or illicit trafficking on ammunition at that time. So it's been established as part of the Organization of American States. And again, then it inspired the establishment of global frameworks later on. So there's a global framework, which is not a legally binding instrument, but there's, for example, the Program of Action on Small Arms and Light Weapons, which was established in 2001. And then there's also a new instrument on ammunition and the management of ammunition, which was only adopted last year. So you see that there was leadership in the region already before it became part of a global agenda. And this is very much sort of what the region has become known for. At the same time, it also focused on addressing a very regional specific issue, which is the concern over arms trafficking within the Americas region. And this is something countries continue to focus on, because they don't have nuclear weapons. So nuclear weapons, while there's leadership in the political sphere, there's actually a lot more focus on the issue of small arms in particular, and Elena will go into this as well when she talks about the work of the center. So the importance of all of what I just explained in promoting international humanitarian law, and I'm sure we can talk about this some more, but I've tried to sort of keep it concise. So I just want to start with saying regional disarmament is not just a security issue, but it links to other parts, and it links, for example, to the respect of human rights and the promotion of international humanitarian law. And concretely, this is the promotion of disarmament treaties and agreement, whether that's on the global level or at the regional level. States reinforce their commitment to international humanitarian law. They ensure that the laws governing armed conflict and war are respected. And that, for example, includes that there's a restriction of the use of certain weapon types in conflicts, which is obviously part of the international humanitarian law. The second point is that it also reduces the proliferation of arms in general, which can be used in conflict, and thereby helps protect civilians and vulnerable people from suffering and harm. The third point is that regional disarmament in particular encourages countries to work together to develop joint initiatives, to build trust with neighboring states, to enhance their collective security, and to ensure that they comply with IHL. And the last point is that sustainable development efforts supported by disarmament foster lasting peace and security, and therefore they reinforce international humanitarian law because they promote human rights and stability in communities. And this is also something which came out in the Mentimeters, that somebody included, for example, the word development. And I think we are always trying to say disarmament, yes, is a security issue and it can be very technical, but it is part of a much bigger agenda and can contribute also to sustainable development. And with that, I'll hand over to Elena, and maybe Elena, I'll keep going with the presentation and you'll just tell me to switch slides.
If I may,
yes.
Sorry, if I may beforehand, of course, formally introduce Elena, as I could not beforehand without her presence. Briefly, that was a great presentation, Dr. Butcher. Thank you very much for sharing it with us. And we are indeed very proud of being Tlatelolco members in Latin America. Every time I see another Latin American or Caribbean in disarmament spaces, we immediately bond over this. Without further ado, Elena Battani, it's a pleasure to have you here. Elena Battani is a junior advisor on youth and disarmament for the regional center of UNODA in Latin America and the Caribbean. She has previously worked in various disarmament and international security matters in different agencies of the Holy See. And she holds a master's degree in non-proliferation and terrorism studies, as well as in Latin American studies. So she is, as you may see, a very well-adjusted, fit for our current purposes here guest. And I am sure she will deliver a great presentation on this. Without further ado, Elena, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Felipe, and thank you for this presentation too. I hope that I will meet your hopes. So in my part of the presentation, I will expand a bit more on what ULIREC does to promote regional disarmament, and also focus on how we promote youth engagement on this topic. Oh, if it can be the next slide, please. Thank you. So, ULIREC's specific role, again, is to assist states in their disarmament, non-proliferation, and arms control commitments. And LYRIC helps SAID to translate the commitments they took at an international, regional, or sub-regional level into action by promoting also regional dialogue and coordination. Our work of assistance is based around four main pillars. We do provide policy guidance, legal assistance, technical support, and again, we foster regional dialogue on the region. But it might still be a bit abstract, so let me give you some examples that I hope will help you to concretize what we do. If we can move to the next slide. Thank you. So the first example is the one of the Caribbean Firearms Roadmap. It's a very important initiative for LYRIC, but also, and most of all, a very important success for the region. And it gives you a great example of how LYRIC supports the states in coordinating at the regional level and helps them to translate their international commitment into concrete and ambitious action. So the objective of the roadmap is to address the proliferation of illicit small arms, so guns, firearms, and promote in this way a safer Caribbean. The roadmap serves as a common framework for the Caribbean to implement the existing international norms on the subject. So the program of action that Katia was mentioning before, the Amsterdam Treaty, but also the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. But through the roadmap, what is also important is that states go further in their commitment. They set clear and common goals. They set a common deadline to implement them. They also adopt a common monitoring and evaluation framework, and they include components that were not included in other treaties, such as ammunition. So what was LYRIC's role in the adoption of the roadmap? LYRIC coordinated dialogue so that states can achieve agreement on a final text, as well as offer some technical assistance in the drafting of the text and the goals. We can move to the next slide, please.
Yeah, just before I move to the next slide, Elena, I think if you kind of can place your mic in a way that it's not too close, because the sound's coming in and out and it's a little bit tricky otherwise to hear you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Does it work better? Okay.
Let's try.
Yeah, I believe the quality of the sound is better. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So another example of what we do is our work on women's security and disarmament. Again, the region was really an agenda setter in this topic. So the region was promoting this topic at an international level, but what we do as LYRIC is again to help the states of the region to concretize their ambition. So we support states to integrate a gender-sensitive perspective into national arms control measures. For example, we provide legal studies comparing arms control legal frameworks and violence against women legal frameworks. We also support awareness raising on the importance of considering gender perspective in firearms-related crimes. For example, we provide states with courses on firearm investigation from a gender perspective. We also support states in their ambition to increase the participation of female officers in the field of disarmament by offering training to women officers. And then we try to make the voices of the women that are already in the field heard by, for example, our publication, Women Forces of Changes, that highlights the profile of the women working for disarmament in the region. And maybe you can go next slide, if you can still hear me well. Okay, and then another example is of how LYRIC offers policy guidance and technical support is our work on the topic of firearms in school. On this topic, LYRIC did an important study in 2020, a study that tried to quantify the phenomenon, understand the root causes of the presence of firearms in school, and also propose solutions to address it. And after the study was published, we started to work with states on the topic, and we supported them by drafting guidelines for the development of protocols to tackle the presence and use of firearms in school, most notably in Jamaica. So, of course, the adoption of the protocol is a decision that is a decision of national government and a political decision. But what we do from UNLIREC side is that we offer this technical expertise um, based on our study and on the lesson learned from other states of the region, as well as expert recommendation, so that we can help states to adopt the national policy that can better work in their framework. And maybe we can go to the next slide. So now that you have a clearer idea, I hope, of what UNLIREC does, let's focus on what you can do to promote regional disarmament and how we can support you. Okay, next slide. So first, why it is important to include youth in disarmament and arms control, because young people are really involved on armed violence, and because they are involved, they can make the difference. How are they involved? First, and unfortunately, young people are perpetrators of violence. For example, 37% of homicides in the world are conducted by young people, according to the World Health Organization. Young people are also, of course, victims of violence, and also victims of the fact that investments go on armaments instead of going to youth. But what is important, and then maybe I will highlight here, is that young people can be actors of change, and the important role that young people can play has been highlighted both by the UN Security Council and the UN General Assembly. And here you have a quote of the UN Secretary General in his new agenda for peace. You can say that he wrote that youth active participation in decision-making processes enhances the legitimacy of peace and security initiatives. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is our action at UNLIREC and also the Office for Disarmament Affairs? So we try to help young people to use their potential as actors of change through different educational programs. We are very proud of the program that we launched in the region this year, which is called Generación Paz. Generación Paz is a regional program that focuses on a topic that is important for the region, the one of armed violence prevention. And in our while we were selecting our members, we tried to give a particular attention to integrate in the program vulnerable communities from the peripheries, from indigenous groups. Our language is Spanish, so we tried to be more inclusive, even if we don't have still a Portuguese program. And then our objective is to support youth in creating disarmament projects in the field, obtaining in this way a multiplier effect. We also have programs at a global level, for example, the Desarmament Dashboard, which is a website where you can find courses on disarmament, and all these courses will give you a certificate of completion. So I really invite you to explore the different courses that we have. And also we have education program at a global level, and in this case the focus is a bit more broad, so we don't focus only on the region, but we focus on other challenges such as weapons of mass destruction, emerging tech, and of course again conventional weapons. What is important when we select the members is that they also represent the whole region of the world, and our objective is to make youth voices heard by encouraging them to participate in high-level UN meetings. And here you have the photo of two young Brazilian girls that participated to one regional and one global programs. They are both called Juliana. So the first Juliana is participating to Generación Paz, and she's working at an organization called Fogo Cruzado. Sorry for the Portuguese, where she analyzes the impact of gun violence. And the second Juliana is an historian. She participated to a global program, and she now has a YouTube channel where she explains different topics, including nuclear weapons and conflict. Next slide, please. And yes, and so what's next? First, okay, I really invite you to follow Youth for Disarmament and also read social media so that you can see when we will launch our next youth programs. And in 2025, I can already announce you that we will have a regional program focusing on nuclear weapons, so as a part of a more global program. And this program is called the Youth Leader Fund for a World Without Nuclear Weapons. So we will have a regional component here. I also invite you to read the publication, and you have the link at the end of the presentation, 10 Action for Disarmament, which can give you some idea of how to act for disarmament. And then just let me maybe tell you that this is a very good moment to engage in disarmament from a youth perspective. Not only because the SDGs, so the Sustainable Development Goals, were already calling you to action, but because in September, the member states adopted a new framework, which is called the Pact of the Future. And the Pact of the Future has 5 pillars. One of them is peace and security. And in these pillars, one of the commitments states take is to accelerate the implementation of youth, peace, and disarmament. And the second pillar is on youth and future generation. So you're the largest youth generation in history. There are 1.8 billion young people now in the world. So it's really a good moment to engage and make your voices heard. And maybe next slide. So here you have some references that can help you to follow on and have more information on this topic. And maybe next slide. Okay, so the next slide is just thank you very much for listening to us, and we will be happy to answer to all your questions if you have. Thank you.
That's perfect. Thank you so much for your presentation, Elena. And as somebody who was personally a part of the inaugural cohort of the Youth Leaders Fund for a World Without Nuclear Weapons, I highly recommend it. It's very good. Some of my colleagues are in fact watching us right now, and it's a very active forum, even after our first class has already concluded. And we will be mentoring the next class, by the way. So that's an opportunity for you all watching, if you want to meet me again and watch me rant about nuclear weapons. Well, with that being said, I would like to thank you both very much for your presentation and progress into our Q&A section. We have a few questions already piled up. If my colleague Isadora can please. Oh, yes, thank you. This one is a personal favorite of mine. The thing is, Brazil has signed the TPNW, and if I am not mistaken, it was actually the first country to do so in 2017. However, the ratification process in Congress has stagnated for years. What strategies may youth organizations and individual young activists adopt to promote the treaty's ratification internally? If you would, of course, both want to take a shot, even though this question is more focused on youth, you are both welcome to answer it. Thank you.
Great. Well, let me just do general, and then I'll give the floor to Elena for use-specific involvements, as she is closer in age to that than I am. Yes, Brazil has signed the TPNW in 2018, but has not ratified this. So it kind of expressed initial support to the treaty. The ratification, and I'm not entirely sure, maybe Felipe, you can give us a little bit more of the context or the conversation which goes on in Brazil around why it hasn't been ratified, whether sometimes there's an administrative issue and sometimes there's political ones. I think depending on what those challenges are, maybe they're both, I think the action could look a little bit different. I think it is important, and if I'm thinking that this is the community who looks at IHL, to really also make the case that this is a treaty which has its origin as a humanitarian initiative and looking very specifically at the impact, and underscore the leadership Brazil had, especially in the nuclear weapon-free zone, but also on peaceful use of nuclear energy. Brazil has always been a leader on those issues, and perhaps sort of create a bit of a sensibilization across the population on the importance of this treaty and why it would be important for Brazil to not only join the treaty, but also continue its leadership in the field of nuclear weapon and disarmament. And that would be sort of my suggestion. Elena, maybe you have more use-specific ideas as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Katja. Well, I don't think it applies only to youth, but maybe it applies specifically to youth, since youth is very enthusiastic in taking leadership on this question. So the ratification process is a process that happens at the Congress, so where you have your representative standing. And maybe my advice will be really try to engage with these representatives, to start a conversation with them, and maybe to invite them to conferences that show why it is important for Brazil to sign this treaty, maybe writing them letters from your university or from your youth group. I mean, they're the representatives, so try to engage in a dialogue with them and show why you think is important.
Perfect. Yeah, partially answering to Katya's statement on this, I would say that it very much is more of a political issue. The ratification Congress here goes through, it doesn't go directly to the plenary of the Congress, but it goes through some committees first. The first of them being the Committee on, I believe, External Relations and International Security. And the membership of those committees are composed by a part of the Congress members, not all of them. And some of the votes given in the past few years have signaled in the direction of having concerns due to if adhesion to the treaty could potentially impact Brazil's potential to join military alliances that make use of ostensive nuclear deterrence. But even those statements have been mostly like very punctual, and we haven't really heard about any progress for quite a few years. So it's mostly being sat upon, like it has been set aside. That being said, Elena, I'm a firm believer in direct action, and I believe that writing to our representatives is a very good pathway to follow. And I have, in fact, been trying to prod our IHL clinic into reforming our advocacy group and tackling this issue. So I hope perhaps we can make a difference on that end. And to those watching, if you are interested in participating in such a thing and cooperating with us, perhaps we can have a chat in the future. That being said, I would welcome our next question to come into our screen. Isadora, if you may, please. Isadora, by the way, is our clinic member who is working on the backstage. Would like to briefly mention her because even though you are seeing our faces, nothing of this will be possible without her help in the backstage. The next question is partially linked to the first one, because due to the region's rare involvement in international armed conflicts, the public often thinks of disarmament issues, especially nuclear ones, but also others, as a bit too distant from their own reality. As you have noted in your presentations, we are usually concerned with small arms trafficking, but sometimes not with the other larger issues, such as ballistics, landmines, and things such as that, at least in Brazil. What are some of the dangers with this apathetic view of disarmament, and how can it be combated in terms of engagement with the public as a whole?
Great. Yeah, I think the answer may be very short, but I think that's regional disarmament in a sort of nutshell, right? Not every region has to be involved in everything. I think there is certainly enough insecurity issues in Latin America that, the region perhaps wants to focus on the conventional side of the treaties, and also of the implementation of this to enhance sort of the public security or citizen security, as it's often referred to as well, in the absence of the participation in international armed conflicts. I do believe that the current conflicts we are seeing in the world are also impacting the region. We are looking at Ukraine, we are looking at Israel and the Middle East at the moment. And I do think that while it seems far away, there is impacts in the region, whether it's on increased prices, sometimes on, gas and oil. So I do not think, and maybe we need to make sure that those narratives sort of all link up to the issue of disarmament. But I do not believe in a connected world that a large-scale conflict in another part of the world is sort of leaving everybody else out and without any impact. So I think a regional disarmament and a focus on what security issues are in the region, the most pressing ones, is important. But then also to have that narrative that security for Ukraine or, in certain parts of the world is a relevant issue also for Brazil. I think that's it's dangerous to think that it only affects other states, because those dynamics are very clear. And if we look at the UN and how states position themselves when they adopt certain resolutions on especially those conflicts, a lot of power politics goes into the voting on these resolutions. And we just also even looked at the TPNW and why Brazil hasn't ratified this, but it is also related to international politics and security strategies on how you want to maybe join security alliances, which are not necessarily in your region. And I think all of this plays together. So keep it at the regional level, focus where it's at, but at the same time, sort of make those global connections that it is relevant also to our regional context. And then maybe one last point, I'm sorry, it's a little longer, but I think the leadership of those issues, or the leadership of the region on those issues, remains absolutely crucial at the global level. It is, at the moment, the first committee which deals with disarmament in the General Assembly is in session at the UN, as it is every year in October. And it is this year, for example, led by Costa Rica. Different sort of states in the region have really been agenda setters for the global agenda. And I think the region needs to continue that leadership on issues where they are just ahead of the curve, for example, on establishing nuclear weapon-free zones, on not being involved in international armed conflicts. And I think that's very important also to continue.
That is perfect. Elena, would you like to take a shot at this question as well?
No, I think that Katja responded very completely on that. Maybe just to say that, I mean, Latin America is the most violent region in the world, and this is a disarmament issue that touches the reality of every person every day. And from a youth perspective, young people in Latin America are really exposed to violence. A young man in Latin America has like 5 times more probability of being killed than a young man in the average, like in the world in average. So this is a disarmament issue, and it is an issue that touches everyone every day. So I think it's also important. It's also important to remember that. And maybe on the like global strategic competition, I think that like we see the consequences of that in Latin Americans too. When we talk about military spending is also rising in the region. So I think that, again, as Katja was saying, is important to show that we live in an interconnected world, and that even if there are no hot conflict in the region, then the region is also reacting to what happens in other regions of the world. Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. I believe there is one last question on the more nuclear and weapons of mass destruction side of things. If you may please add it to our screen, Isadora. Thank you. As Katia has pointed out in her presentation, Latin America and the Caribbean have defined themselves as pioneers in nuclear disarmament through the Treaty of Tlatelolco. What role can the region have nowadays in terms of nuclear disarmament, once it has already been region? We already have achieved regional disarmament, but how can we use this reputation as pioneers, as leaders nowadays, and how can we exert this globally? If you may please, of course, Katja first and then Elena second, or if you want to invert the order, feel free to.
Go first, Elena, come on.
Okay, so yes, thank you. Again, I think that like the present state of the world shows that there is still a lot to do in terms of nuclear disarmament. So the promotion of the TPNW at an international stage, you mentioned it before, but is still something important. There are some treaties still that are being negotiating. So, for example, the Fissile Materia Cutoff Treaty is a treaty that is still in negotiation, so Latin America can support on that. The CTBT, so the treaty that bans nuclear tests, is not yet active. So again, this is another issue where Latin America can take the lead, and is already taking the lead inside the organization CTBTO, so the treaty organization. I think that also the experience that Latin America has with this nuclear weapon-free zone can serve in the process to establish new nuclear weapons-free zones. For example, there are discussions ongoing since many years in establishing a nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East, and here Latin America can bring its experience too. The focus of the nuclear debate now is also on humanitarian, on disarmament. I mean, humanitarian nuclear disarmament. So I think that the region can also, from a research point of view, continue research on the humanitarian impacts of nuclear weapons and nuclear explosion. This is something for maybe more the academia, but is still an interesting topic that maybe has not been as much explored as we could. So yeah, maybe these are some ideas. I don't know, Katja, if you can give more of that.
I think you made a lot of very good points. The sort of proliferation of the nuclear weapon-free zones. I think there's a lot of leadership in the region to continue expanding that model into other parts of the world. There's also the anniversary of the establishment of the nuclear weapon-free zone coming up in 2027, which I think is going to also is an important milestone maybe in the region to continue visualizing also that achievement, and to also for its own narrative in the region to be sure that they can work on disarmament issues and they can try and replicate this. One specific issue, which maybe I could just add, is the issue of nuclear security, which is part of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, where, for example, there is a lot of collaboration between Argentina and Brazil established formally. And I think this is a fantastic model which can also be replicated in other parts of the world. I'm not saying everything is always perfect, but I do think that there's a strong collaboration between two states in the region, two large states in the region, leading on the issue of nuclear security. Given the sort of insecurity around also some energy issues, if we're looking specifically at this, I think this is going to be more prominently in the future, that issue, as states figure out how to make their energy resources more sustainable. And I do believe that there is a strong model which can be replicated in other regions in the world and which can also be sort of showcased. So I believe there's a lot of room to continue the leadership in the region on the issue.
Yes, of course. I believe so far Argentina and Brazil have the only bilateral process for mutual verification in that regard. That is a very good example to bring up. If you may please bring us our next question, Isadora. I believe now we're moving into... Oh, yes. So Brazil has become one of the world's primary producers and exporters of cluster munitions, something that I believe escapes the attention of many people here in Brazil, even those working in international relations and international law. Has the UNLDA Regional Center communicated with Brazil concerning this? How has it been following this development, and what recommendations does it have for Brazil in that regard, if any?
Yes, I think that the issue of cluster munition remains sort of an important part. There's obviously the Convention on Cluster Munition, which has been adopted in 2008. And this is also part of the UN's work to continue the promotion of that convention, specifically given that the convention foresees the prohibition, but also the destruction, and then also clearance and victims assistance. Usually the way the UN works is they don't go pointing out sort of specific countries and what they're doing, but I think there is a recognition certainly on what is going on. There's always an effort from the UN side to universalize these global treaties, including the list I've shown you before, and that will also apply to the conventional cluster munition. So the efforts of the UN are targeted towards universalization. In some states, that is quicker than in others, but it requires a lot of sensitization on the issues. There is economic aspects to it sometimes. There is a lot of components which go into this, and it is unfortunately a long process for some countries. And it might even come up in bilateral meetings, that the UN would ask Brazil, what is their position on the issue, or if they would join. But I think the UN doesn't have the role of sort of being the international police. But it is certainly our job is to try and universalize the convention and then to assist states to implement those commitments.
Absolutely. It's interesting to hear that you have kept a bridge with Brazil concerning this, that you have communicated with. And of course, the UN's job is not to tell countries what to do, but to perhaps give recommendations and assist them in that regard. And it's great to hear about that. Elena, would you like to expand further on this question?
No, maybe just again call for your action too. And if you are concerned by the issue, of course, you can also bring that to your representative or organize debates around that to make the issue more, to generate a debate at the national states. I think at the end, this is what works better, because the UN is an organization of states, and what really can make a lot of difference is how the people communicate with their governments.
That's a great point, indeed.
And maybe if I can just add one point, is also that while it's not strictly covering the issue of cluster munition per se, but Brazil has signed the Arms Trade Treaty, but it's similar to the TPNW, has not ratified. Perhaps this is another avenue which could then be explored, because at least, starting with a state to say, let's no longer produce, let's not export. Obviously, you also and I think the ATT as a sort of treaty which looks at the international trade and ensuring that certain risk criteria, especially in context of war, are taken into account when you export ammunition, as well as arms, conventional arms categories in this case. I think it might be a good avenue also to look at this, to take a first step where you sort of make sure that in its export of cluster munition, Brazil obliges with the ATT once it would have fully ratified it, and then that would be a first step, and then maybe a second step would be looking at the production per se, because I always think of disarmament as baby steps. But don't be concerned that if they don't join the conventional cluster munition, that they're not doing anything. There's also other avenues and other political commitments they have already taken, which might be able to be applied to this context to sort of at least assure the legal trade is done in compliance with IHL.
Absolutely. That is very good advice. There is always alternative avenues to follow and multiple paths that are available to us, to those working in advocacy, to those concerned with the application of the law. And I think that is a very good reminder. I believe we have only one last question left in our list. If we can go over it. This is a more kind of open-ended question because of course, there is a lot to talk about. I believe a whole debate could be had only about conventional firearms and munitions trafficking in Latin America and the Caribbean. But we would like to know what is your take on the current leading concerns regarding this issue in the region? What are the most pressing factors influencing conventional firearms and munitions trafficking right now? And of course, as this is a very open-ended question, you may have a little bit of time to consider to your priorities on what you would like to expound on in this question.
Yeah, maybe I can go first because before I joined ANLIREC, I was the small arms focal point in New York, so I'm a little bit more familiar with that part of our work. I would say that the issue of trafficking conventional firearms and ammunition is the number one concern in the region, because as Elena already said before, it impacts everybody. I don't think there is, anybody in the region who doesn't know anybody or has not been personally impacted by armed violence. And I'm not even saying homicides, but I'm saying things like robberies. We live in Peru, the office is in a nice neighborhood. It feels safe. But just on Monday, there was a person who was robbing a betting shop in front of the school of my children, and he had a replica firearm. Obviously, people can't tell a real firearm from a replica, so everybody freaked out. And it is the norm in this country. And I feel sometimes, and I'll get to the sort of leading concerns in a second, but sometimes I have a feeling that people have almost accepted the issue of firearms being a day-to-day occurrence in their communities. And I think this is something where the change in the narrative and how we think about weapons, and that, in some countries in the region, I also see, especially if I travel to Central America, I see heavily armed security personnel outside shops, outside banks, and people feel that this is adding to the security. But we have, for example, the private security issue in the region, where a lot of our security has been absorbed by the private security sector. And we are apparently feeling more secure about this, but this sector is highly unregulated in a lot of countries in the region. And we don't know if one of these private security firms, we don't know if they vet the people. We don't know what happens to these weapons they have when they close shop. There is very little oversight over how they store these weapons. So private security, I think, for me personally, is something I see in the region as a trend, and also as a narrative that more weapons, more security helps us to increase our level of security. And I would like to see that changed in the region, that less weapons are actually, the ultimate objective to increase our security. On a sort of more practical basis, I think there is the issue of trafficking. Often there is a circulation of weapons in the region, and I think this is where we have to acknowledge that there is not one state who can solve this issue by themselves. If one state closes some loopholes, organized crime and gangs who are mainly associated with trafficking in our region will move into other spaces where it is not so, and they'll just move across the border. We are looking at the Amazon region, for example, here in Peru, which is also, I think, relevant for Brazil. And I think that trafficking is a regional phenomena, and I think it needs to be also addressed as a regional phenomenon. So the circulation of the weapon, not only north-south, we're always saying, all these weapons coming from the US, but there is a lot of weapons circulating in the region itself. And only if states start collaborating on some of those issues will they actually be able to address this. And then one additional point I want to make is that there's trafficking in the region of existing weapons, but there's also insufficient oversight over legal weapons the state owns. And we're looking at police, sometimes defense. It includes also private security, but those are legal weapons, and they're very, very often diverted into the illegal sphere in our region because of insufficient controls at the national level. And this is, I think, important to note, that it's not only the trafficking of existing weapons, but there is almost a supply of weapons from some of the legally owned stockpiles in the region because of insufficient oversight by the state. And I think this is where we, as a sort of center, for example, try and work with the states to strengthen that oversight. And at the moment, just to give you one example, we are also not only looking at defense and police, but we are also looking, for example, at the judiciary sector. So if a weapon was involved in a crime, it's been confiscated, it's awaiting the trial in court, if there is one, because we have high levels of impunity as well. But that weapon gets not stored at the police nor at the defense, it just gets stored at another place. And those places, because they are not sort of equipped very often for storing a large amount of weapons, and because we have a lot of cases in the region, there is a large amount of weapons in the sort of judiciary system. There is very little oversight of them. So much so that the evidence in some of these weapons involved in some of the crimes is insufficiently preserved to actually then be taken to court, because it's just so many of them, and storage is a real issue. So this is an area where we as a center focus on in the region at the moment as well.
That
and maybe
is...
Elena, can talk to some prevention issues as well.
I Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, maybe also, I know that is something that interests also youth a lot. An issue that is becoming more and more uh, like of concern in the region is also the use of new technology to create new weapons. So, for example, at Tulirec, we work with experts on how to understand how 3D printers can be used and what the impact of guns created with 3D printers can have on trafficking, and how we can adapt the international norms to these new challenges. Of course, now is not the majority of the trafficking, but is an issue of concern, and also is an issue of concern because we have to adapt the international norms to this new way of creating weapons. So maybe just to add on that, and I don't know, Katja, if you want to compliment.
Yeah, no, maybe just to create, I think the involvement of youth, and I think with this Spanish speaking program we have at the moment, looking specifically at armed violence in the region, I do believe that youth has an absolutely crucial role to play in how the narrative shapes the region on armed violence, and that they can be agents of change in their own communities. And I think we need to, as a center, invest more in that, because yes, we work with national authorities and, you know, on legislation, on policies, on training expert. But I think the root causes of armed violence, or the idea that you want to possess a weapon, whether it's for your own protection or whether you just want to show off to, you know, your peers sometimes, is concerning. That there is a sort of culture almost around this issue. If we're looking at music, you know, movies, sometimes weapons are, you know, I can just look at my kids on tomorrow's Halloween, and I know half of them will dress up, and the boys will all come with swords and sort of pistols. I mean, not real ones, but there is like the idea that this is something cool to have, apart from the protection issue. And I do think that youth can play a key role in shaping or reversing a little bit that narrative. And then we as a center need to make that effort to really look also at the grassroots level to prevent armed violence. Because yes, you can try and stop the supply of weapons, but you also will have to address the demand of weapons. And if we don't also look at the demand side, then I think we are not going, because people will always find ways if they really would like to have a weapon. But I think that working on both the supply and the demand side is absolutely crucial. And especially on the demand side, I see a lot of room for youth engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry. As somebody who is a big fan of fantasy literature, such as Lord of the Rings and the role-playing games, I absolutely agree. Yes, swords are cool, but yeah, that is absolutely a concern that must be addressed, because, as you have said, people, even when in strictly regulated spaces, people end up getting their hands on weapons if they really want to. This brings me to mind Japan, which is a very a country that regulates firearms very strictly, and gladly they have a low index or a low incidence of armed of firearms violence. However, there is a pressing issue of homemade weapons there. For instance, we of course have all learned about the case of the death of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe through a homemade weapon. And all of which you said has raised very good points on our regional issues, or which are very present here in Brazil. But as you have noted, they are transnational issues, or there is a lot of cross-border weapons trafficking. And as a country of continental proportions, such as Brazil, we have a very large border with almost every country in Latin America, in South America. and a lot of it is unwatched, especially the fluvial borders. As you have said, in the Amazon region, a lot of our rivers are not really that dutifully patrolled by armed forces or police. They are very spread out, and that provides an avenue that criminal organizations have been exploring. And the issue of new technologies that Elena brought up actually brought to mind the fact that once again, criminal organizations are exploring this already. We have already seen images of criminal organizations using drones to keep watch over the neighborhoods they have territorial control over, watching over police and following them around. We are absolutely concerned about how they might be used in the future for aggressive purposes as well, if eventually they are equipped with weapons themselves. That being said, I would like to deeply thank you for all your contributions. You have raised amazing topics, and I think this end of the session really ties into our last session that we had yesterday. There was a panel on organized crime and non-international armed conflicts in Brazil, in how pressing the issue has become with criminal organization and the related violence in Brazil. And we are seeing a really significant escalation of this violence in the last few years, as they have acquired a bigger, newer, more so this goes to show how we are really not all that isolated from violence. Not at all, as Elena has pointed out. We are the most violent continent in the world and the most violent region. So we need to keep our eyes open for this and keep an eye to the future, how these trends are influencing our day-to-day lives and how we can work to better our communities. And I hope we will be having the UN at our backs, supporting us, regional and national efforts in that end. So once again, thank you very much for coming here with us, for taking your time to give us this brilliant presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that opportunity and for all the leadership on that issue. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And thank you for all your questions too.
Of course. This brings us to the conclusion of our panel. And I would also like to thank the public for coming here to watch us. As you may have noticed, our esteemed participants, there is a link for presence that was sent in the live chat. If you are here for concerned with the credits and the diploma that you get for participating in this course, there you go. Please sign our form. That being said, thank you once again, and we are signing off here. Bye-bye.